Hey everybody, make sure to check out the 2020 Fantasy Baseball Almanac and Draft Guide. It comes with free in-season advice. You can't get that anywhere else. Check it out on Amazon.com or look in the show notes below. Sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about the Miami Marlins. Not a ton there in terms of, team. I think they're still building. They did make some interesting moves. They have some young guys that are kind of moving up, and the rotation is interesting. But, in terms of batters, I'm looking at, Diaz, Aguilar, Alfaro, Rojas. I'm looking at these guys. Villar, they got from Baltimore. Do you see maybe one or two of these guys is kind of under the radar? Because everybody on the Marlins is going to be under the radar from fantasy point of view, just purely from batters. And I think Dickerson is another guy that kind of stuck out to me as kind of we were putting this manual together, this draft guide. Maybe even Brian Anderson as well, but, I don't know. But what do you think? Who are some guys that you would think about your putting or adding to your stacked roster already in our keeper league?
Honestly, you kind of said on him, but I think Anderson's probably the best guy primed to really take off. He was solid in his rookie year. He looked good, just didn't really quite live up to what they expected him to really break out. But that could be another year coming. He's still young. So I like what I've seen there. He's someone I would take a look at, and putting him in a lineup now that has a little more pop to it than they did last year could help them as well, because teams were pretty much pitching around him. There was no one else.
Right.
You've got VR in there now, who's been really, really good. Even in Baltimore, he hit 24 homers and drove in 73, which is saying something.
Yeah, I know.
You got Aguilar in there, who, depending on what you get, he's got some big pop in the bat, but struggled a lot last year. So it'll be interesting. Corey Dickerson's a guy who just keeps hitting, but no one's given him a chance to start for some reason.
Right.
He performed in Tampa Bay, and they kind of cut him loose. He performed in Pittsburgh, and they just kind of cut him loose. I never quite got it. I think he's a really good player. He's a good hitter. He's not someone I'm going to jump at, early on in a draft. But if you're looking for outfield help later in the draft, he's definitely a guy who's just going to consistently hit. As long as he stays healthy.
Sure. And let's move it on now to the rotation. So you got guys like Caleb Smith, Urena Yamamoto, who actually destroyed me, I think, for the 2 weeks he was called up. There was one, he knocked me out. As bad as my team was going into the season, I actually had hopes of making the playoffs and scraping a team together. Now, this year, I do think I'll make the playoffs. But last year, I was just, I was starting from the bottom. But Yamamoto actually ended my fantasy baseball season last year when he came up, which is kind of funny. But yeah, who are you excited about on this roster? Because they are adding talent slowly but surely. They're not as, let's say, pathetic as the Orioles, who, by the way, is my team that I root for. I think there's a hat around here on display behind me if you're watching on YouTube. There we go, bait back there. But yeah, I mean, what do you think about this rotation, man?
I think they're a young rotation, but I think they could be one of the better ones in the National League. All said and done, Caleb Smith's a good young pitcher who looked really, really good for a while there, and then kind of seemed to tire a bit. But he's definitely a good one. Sandy Alcantara, I like a lot. I think he's another good one. As you mentioned, Yamamoto. All these guys could be solid mid to late round picks. Pablo Lopez is another one who looked good before he got hurt. The only one I'm really not high on is Urena. And I would say he gains value if they can stick him in the closer role, because I think that's probably where he would be best suited and would thrive the most. But right now, I think he's really the only thing they could even consider a veteran in that rotation. So you kind of have to have something. But yeah, I think he's best suited in the pen. So if he ends up there, he might be a closer option that you take a look at. Although you're not going to get a ton out of him, just because they're not going to win the division. They're not going to win 90 games or anything else.
Yeah, they're still they're far off, but at least they have unlike my Orioles, at least they have a plan. A plan of action.
They do. And I'll actually tell you, I think we had discussed doing an episode here where we get into some of our bold predictions for the season, and I don't want to spoil all of them, but I'll give you one of them right here.
Sure.
Which is that the Marlins will not finish in last place in the division.
Good for them.
I'm going to go. things can change obviously between now and
Mhm.
the beginning of this. But right now, I'm gonna go out on a limb. I'm gonna say the Mets are gonna really, but they're gonna Mets up the season and finish in the basement, despite.
Whoa. I disagree with that, but you know more than I do. I'll definitely I'll say that you are generally right about these things, and I'm generally not. So I'll say that. So let's talk Miami Marlins wins, ceiling and floor. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I think you would agree, and you just said you don't think they're going to finish in the basement. So what do you think if everything goes right, everybody's healthy, maybe they make a move or two, maybe they call somebody up who's interesting in the system? What do you think their top line win is? Do you think they can get to 80?
I think the best their top line would be 81, 82, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
500 season for them. I think is a huge step forward
Sure.
and in a best case scenario. Not quite sure they're going to get there, but I think that's their best case scenario if things go right. Worst case scenario, we just saw that last year.
Yeah.
Worst case is a lot of these guys regress, like Caleb Smith and Alcantara. Lopez and Yamamoto all regress, and then they're stuck with kind of questions about, okay, great, we just built around all these young pitchers, and now what do we do?
And they all suck. No, yeah, yeah. So obviously, floor would probably be basement, but that's not how you see it. And like I said, you're very accurate with this stuff. So when we do kind of our World Series predictions and our futures and all that stuff, which is going to be coming down later in the off season, pay attention because Eric is, if you're a gambler, Eric's pretty good at futures bets for the MLB. I mean, he's on over under win totals, and we should probably do that later in the series too. Is kind of predict win totals, and I'll give you the over under win totals for the teams and all that stuff. But you're on the teams to break out early. You generally know who's going to go because you pay attention, a lot more attention than I do, to be completely honest. So